it seems that we are closer to our today's lecture. Okay, guys. So, my usual question is, do you hear me well enough? Do you see me? And please give me a swift note somewhere in comments so that we would be confident that it's time for us to start. I'll check it out. How it is. Okay. Something happens live. Okay. Just a couple of minutes while we are joining. Our stream for today's night. Well, it's not actually night. In Kiev, it's 6 p.m. It's late summer, so it's a bright day. Probably in different parts of our listeners and watchers are. It could be some other time. Oh, yeah. And now I see the commentaries. Well, it's fine. Okay, then. So, enough of blah, blah, blah. Let's start our today's conversation. Well, and the topic of today's lecture is actually the question: for whom authentic yoga is the best self-transformation method and why? And me, Ivan Ulitko, the instructor of Ukrainian Yoga Federation, the Yogis Without Borders team, is the one who will try to answer this question, at least in some details, which I derive from my insider yoga experience of 13 years of yogic practice and 5 years of teaching. And I've seen lots of yogis, and actually the basis of this question usually lies in the situation in which we are now. And this situation of 2020 is pretty rough times. As I say, the best crossroads for choosing the identity. What can we mean by this? Well, any social turmoils, and this half year was actually a pretty rough one, usually allow us to take a look at ourselves from a slightly different perspective. We are actually forced to do it because, the usual way of life has changed. And it's not only the outer changes, it's not only that somebody has lost his job, or somebody can go for the vacation where he or she usually did go to. But if all this happens to us, then we are in the situation where we can reconsider our life strategies. And these strategies are not only in terms of what we will do or what we have to do, but it's also in the question of the big question, who we are. This big question, usually if someone tries to answer this question, will have lots of simple answers, like I'm a son, a daughter, a professional, anyone, any social role will give a part of this kind of answer. But if life changes are serious, then those roles which usually satisfied us, those answers which we were used to, will not satisfy us anymore. And in this case, usually the one who has enough will and desire turns to one's psyche and to ways of exploring the psyche, the ways of dealing or rearranging one's life in its inner, its sense of values. And this self-rearranging could be done in two great directions, two great institutes, so to say, of working with psyche. The social ones and the esoteric ones. The social, the social psychology ways, which are more or less open. But if we would take a deeper look into any great school of psychology, we will find its esoteric part, the one which is not that lightly available to anyone. You have to study a lot to master truly working methods with psyche. Otherwise, we are stick to the kitchen psychology, which leads us actually nowhere. And but even these ways might not be those which one searches for. In case someone wants to change one's identity in the way that is more dramatic, more deep, one might turn to esoteric ways, esoteric teachings, which offer self-transformation methods and methods of working with psyche, and not only with it. And here I will not discuss the ways which are not yogic ones. I am not a specialist there and have no experience, but what's for yoga and for personal experience, I would like to give some exposition of what could this search lead us to. And any kind of this exposition in my way, it's the ideas of authentic yoga, which is rooted in history and should be actual in practice. Firstly, we must look at those things which are in the background, in the basis of practice of working with oneself, the art of working with oneself. And if we are discussing yoga, then first, which we can see as a basis of the practice, it's even not the practical means, it's not a kind of place where we can look for meditations or any exact even ideas of what is yoga. But it's some inspiring, poetic background within which all the later ideas have aesthetically developed in this or that way are the Vedas, especially the most ancient one, the Rig Veda. And Rig Veda is the set of hymns. It is comprised of 10 chapters, 10 mandalas, and these chapters actually have more or less naturalistic hymns, which the layman can consider to be some kind of pagan hymns to pagan gods, which are in the way that the man asks some goods for oneself, the cows to breed, the warriors to win the battle, and so on. And but the late Rig Veda, in its 10th mandala, and it's a very, very ancient text. It's about we don't know how old it is, because there were no earlier texts to compare it with, but it's 3,000 years from now, or maybe like this. And this 10th mandala is about that old. So no Western philosophy, even Socrates, it's at least 500 years before there was. But if we would take a look at some of the hymns of late Rig Veda, we might notice some very inspiring ideas which lead us to the image of what is the proto-yogi, the very authentic basis of yogi could it be. For instance, I offer you to take a look, a slight look at the so-called Keśin hymn, where we have the proto-yogi and his orgiastic practices. I'll quote a couple of the lines which can give us some perspective on what the early yogis could look like. Well, he is all the sky to look upon. He with long hair is called the light of the sky. I'll quote according to the Ralph Griffith's classical translation of this hymn. And this idea that the proto-yogi is someone who in his practices looks upon everything else, and he's the one who appears like the light of the sky in face of the others, show us mostly the shamanic reminiscence, but slightly shifted. And of course, the inspiring figure of yogi, the one who can comprehend something from some upper perspective, this metaphoric view is rooted here. And then the other part, that transported with our sagehood, mudihood, we have pressed on into the winds. You, therefore, mortal man, behold our natural bodies, and no more. Well, as many scholars note, this is the almost obvious idea of transpersonal out-of-body experience, so to say. And the idea of like shamanic trance also we can see here. And another line, the Muni, the sage, made associate in the holy work of every god, looking upon all varied forms, flies through the region of the air. Here we also have some interesting thing. The religiosity of ancient yogi, proto-yogi, and or it's better to say the non-religiosity, where we don't worship gods, we are their friends. And again, the looking down upon all forms is like another perspective which the yogi could reach in here in the yogic trance. And another line to end this proto-yogi shape is treading the path of sylvan beasts, Gandharvas and Apsaras. He with long locks, who knows the wish, is a sweet and most delightful friend. This line talks about that our proto-yogi is the one who walks the ways, understands deeply wild beasts, heavenly musicians, artists, Gandharvas, and like heavenly dancers or prostitutes of the gods, Apsaras. And he also knows their wishes and is their sweet and most delightful friend, which also gives us some interesting perspective on, so to say, well, a non-aesthetic yogi, quite a wild yogi who can be on par with beasts and with both aesthetically driven and sexually driven creatures. That's enough for this hymn and the Orgiastic practices of proto-yogi Keśin. Let's take a look at some other hymn. For instance, the hymn of creation. Again, 10th mandala Rig Veda 129. Here we have the idea of erotic desire, which is the root of the mindful search within. Again, I'll take the Besham's translation for this and quote from the middle of the hymn. At first, there was only darkness, warped in darkness. All this was only unilluminated cosmic water. That one, which came to be, enclosed in nothing, arose at last, born of the power of heat. This first idea of the inception of universe, or the universe of our own mind, from the heat, and the original word here is tapas, the inner heat, the energetic heat, is described. And continuing. In the beginning, desire ascended on it, and that was the primal seed born of the mind. Here we see that there were a basis of intellectual activity, according to this ancient hymn, is the desire, and the desire, the original word here is kama. Kamastadagre samavartatardhi, manasoretah prathama yadasit. So the desire was the primal seed, the erotic desire of the thinking process, which also has some hints on the later, maybe even tantric lineage. And again, the sages who have searched their hearts with wisdom, known that which is kin to that which is not. This idea of inner search within your own heart, with the means of your minds, is also here in this hymn, which we don't know how old it is. Well, it was before any kind of philosophy, but the later philosophy was much inspired by these kinds of ideas, and yoga in particular. And the end of this hymn, whence all creation had its origin, the Creator, whether he fashioned it or whether he did not, the Creator who surveys it all from highest heaven, he knows, or maybe even he doesn't know. And this idea of incomprehensibility of being, the limitless possibilities of mind, and the idea of not knowing in the end, the idea that even gods don't know how it all is arranged and works, is also some line which gives us the idea of that perspective which ancient yogis had reading those hymns. And another hymn which is good for this kind of perspective is the hymn of speech, the Bach Suktam, which uses words to create worlds. This extraordinary hymn has a couple of lines like this. This hymn is the hymn of self-praisal of the speech. So it's like the goddess of speech praises herself within the words of this hymn, saying the following: "He who eats food eats through me. He who sees, who breathes, who hears what is spoken, does so through me. Those who are ignorant of me perish. Hearken, who is capable of hearing. I tell you that is which deserving to believe." This idea that our cognition and all our actions are based on language, on the speech, on verbal intellect, and some deeper aspects of speech, is here in this hymn. And another thing, I bring forth the paternal heaven abode of the mains upon the crown brows of this supreme being. The idea that the speech also sets the gods, and the gods, the supreme creatures or anything else, exist within the frame of language, within the frame of speech, is also something which is quite deep and fundamental for ancient yogi to comprehend the world. And like this small metaphorical basis, from it we can move on to the texts which actually more feasibly frame the ideas of authentic yoga and its practices. And talking about this text, we talk about the Upanishads. Not all of them, but those which mention yoga directly. And the first one for this is so-called Katha Upanishad. Well, here I show the beautiful statue of the god of death, Yama, the great controller, from root yam, to control. And the whole Upanishad is written in the dialogue genre, where the young Brahmin, the seeker, is talking to god of death and asking him some fundamental questions on life and death. And when trying to explain how to avoid mortality, the god of death, Yama, offers this seeker, Nachiketas, his name, some ideas on yoga and what it actually is. Keep calm and drive the race's age. And using the idea that yoga is a firm control of senses. That is the first definition of yoga, and it's given somewhere in the middle of Katha Upanishad. And actually, when we say that yoga is firm control of senses, originally it's Adha yoga miti manyate sthiram indriya dharanam. So that is called yoga. What is the firm sthiram? Dharanam, control, holding of indriyas, which are closest translated as senses, but it's senses in means of attention. And the idea of yoga, the definition, this first definition of what is yoga, as the controlling of our attention, is quite a deep one. And actually, if we take a look at the practices which go out of this, we can take a look at some naive, I'll say, psychoanalytic hypochondria, which may look like this. If we were trying to find out what we truly want or what is our problem, we are asking ourselves what was in our childhood, what was yesterday, what are our emotions, and how our emotions look like, and we describe our emotions and so on. And we are like doing the hypochondria to ourselves like this. Yeah, there are serious methods for doing it in the right way, but the yogic approach of that old times offers us knowing thyself in a slightly different way. Namely, the former slide I suggested to drive the racer's age, and so what actually is driven? There is a great metaphor which is given in Katha Upanishad, and it's the metaphor of a chariot. Ourselves, we can metaphorize ourselves as a kind of chariot, where our mind is the charioteer, our senses are the horses, and like our mind leads our senses towards this or that direction. The question is, who chooses the direction? And the answer of Katha Upanishad is that there is a master of a chariot, so-called Dhira, the one who is the deep thinking one, from the root dhiyai, to think correctly and deeply. And he orders the manas, who should be well trained, to hold indriyas firmly to attain yoga. And this very idea is more deep than it could sound metaphorically. And it is that we actually are not trying to rule our emotions with the other emotions, but we are ruling our emotions with more higher psychological functions, for instance, the mindful functions. And in this case, we must firstly look somewhere and somehow deep inside ourselves. For this we need a later method of yoga to find out our true desires and grounding within which, and applying the trained mind, we should point out our horses of senses, indriyas, towards the direction where we want to lead our life. This idea is outstanding by itself. Well, the Katha Upanishad doesn't give the direct ways to achieve this idea. That was an esoteric text, as it is, and it shares some kind of idea, and doesn't discuss how to achieve this. But the very idea is marvelous, and this idea implies that we look deep into ourselves, and questioning ourselves, find out what our true desires are. This idea resembles us of the Socrates questioning to search the knowledge within. And you remember this idea of Socrates, where we actually imply that human knows everything. The only thing is to ask him proper questions, so that we could get the knowledge from inside ourselves. This same idea we see in Katha Upanishad, but in a slightly more elaborated way, elaborated metaphorically and in definitions. And there is one more deep idea which will be developed in later yogi texts and practices, the idea of prana, and the idea of its retention. Prana itself is like pra-an. It's like the proto-life breathing, proto-life energy, something energy substract, which is the basis of whole life. Well, it sounds pretty vague, I know, but the very idea of that there is some energetic background of us, and the idea that this energy could be lost, and we have to do some practices not to lose this kind of energy, is very important. The Katha Upanishad gives us the metaphor of human being like the city with 9 gates, and these gates are the senses, the karmendriya and jnanendriya, some ways where we can lose different kinds of energy, and we have to keep the gates under our control, so that the prana would not leave this city of us. So there is this idea which will also be developed lately. And again, no drama. Another great idea of Katha Upanishad is the idea to cut off the ties to release one's heart. This idea is actually quite a lively one. Talking about the ties which bonds bandha in the text our heart, we talk about the emotions, unpleasant ones, which link us to other people. Well, again, the Upanishad doesn't describe how to cut these emotional ties, but the idea that it is possible and it is needed to be done is also here. Well, the question is, what else modern yogis could have lost? And the answer is one idea of what is yoga is non-thinking. Well, it's crap. And we have a couple of other purely yogic Upanishads, some of these basic texts, within which we have the priority of cognitive. For instance, the In Shvetashvatara Upanishad. It's slightly younger than Katha Upanishad, and the ideas of this Upanishad, described in its 2nd chapter, show us that there is the way to use cognition as a part of yoga practice. Well, it's described in general, like the god of mind, Savitar, who linked mind, manas, and the essence of thinking, tattva, did some good things. And linked in the yogic sense. The root of the linkage is same root as root of word yoga. And that's one part of the lineage of cognitive ideas of yoga. And the other thing which is good about this Upanishad is that it gives us the direct like showing what was yoga at that time. We had some yogic postures, breathing techniques, and the interesting thing here is that we have the non-postural approach towards yoga practice in this one of the first yogic texts. And the yoga practices, bodily practices, are aimed at making our body made of yoga fire, so-called yoga agnimayam shariram. And this idea, we met the idea of tapas, the inner heat, in Rig Veda hymns, the idea of making a kind of body out of fire of yoga here in Shvetashvatara Upanishad, makes us think that it's not about just physical practice, the bodily practice of yoga. Well, another thing, the psychosomatics idea that love hurts. Well, actually, the idea that emotions are felt within our body, in certain places of our body, is obvious, almost, and requires a little examination now. But the idea that there are several bodies, like several bodies, not only our physical body, but also the so-called In Taittiriya Upanishad, about 2000 years from now. The Annamaya Kosha, the sheath made of food, Annam. Then there is the Pranamaya Kosha, the sheaths made of energy. Then there is the Kamamaya Kosha, the sheaths made of emotions, feelings. Manamaya Kosha, another body made of mind, made of thoughts. And that all these planes coexist in the same time and are interconnected. This very idea is in this yogic Taittiriya Upanishad. And one thing which Taittiriya brings us is don't refuse the food. Well, there is a whole long line that you should prepare food, you should give food, you should be happy with your food. And this metaphor for like a yogi prescription, that you should live your daily life. You should involve yourself into social interactions. Give food, receive food, take food, enjoy your food. All this leads us to another line of ideas, again, anti-aesthetic, actually. So there is a part of authentic yoga which is anti-aesthetic, like a non-refusing life itself and its food. And going towards the social interactions as a part of yoga. And having our fast way through yoga history, we should note some ideas of Bhagavad Gita. Well, the basic disposition of that time, the epic period, again, it's about 6th century BC, where this text was written, plus minus. I would not give you sharp datings, as it's not a scientific lecture, but general understanding when it was is needed for us. And here we have a kind of situation where we have in the middle of the story the Lord Arjuna, the prince, which has quite a complicated state. There are two opposing armies. From one side, there are his relatives From the other side, there are his cousins, his teachers, and he has to take part in this battle, either on one side or the other. He can refuse, and actually we see here that he dropped his bow and arrows and tries to refuse his duty of a king and a leader, and his charioteer, the one which plays the role of Manas in our chariot metaphor. Here it's the deity Krishna, gives some insights to Arjuna how to deal with this situation of deep inner conflict and existential crisis. Because and this crisis is truly existential, because how can you feel yourself a proper son if you will kill your father? How can you feel yourself a proper ruler if you will refuse to lead your people to the battle? So any choice is a bad choice. And in this situation of identity crisis, existential crisis, and choice to make, Krishna turns to Arjuna with ideas of different kinds of yogas. And actually Bhagavad Gita is the great book on different kinds of yogas, especially its first 10 chapters. Most concentrated in the yogic ideas are first from the second to sixth chapter, probably. And each chapter is actually named, second chapter is Sankhya Yoga, third chapter is Karma Yoga, and so on. The first one is the Yoga of Sorrow of Arjuna, where it's detailed, described how bad does he feel himself. But when we'll take a look at the latest chapters, we would see the yogas as the weapons of choice, which are given to ourselves for this kind of harsh life situations. For instance, here we have some other perspective in yoga, some other view of authentic yoga, namely the following: that yoga is a wisdom, knowing which you can free yourself from the bondage of deeds. And this idea gives us some different perspective, and the deeds here is karmani, the ideas of karma here. And this kind of wisdom, to free ourselves from the bondage of deeds, is something that gives us the idea that these deeds are psychological in some way. Here it's not deeply described how psychological they are, and later texts would do this. We'll come to it later. But here again, we are thinking that yoga is something within which, in Castaneda terms, we can clean our personal history, which is also quite an approach. It's the second chapter, verse 39, the chapter of Sankhya Yoga. And there are other ideas. For instance, even Stoic ideas we can see here, in the sense of ancient Greek and Roman Stoicism. For instance, we have a different definition of yoga, namely, the evenness of mind is called yoga. And this definition actually leads us to idea that yoga could be understood as not only the practice, but also a kind of state of mind. So here I would not make these distinctions all the time, but in this case I should. And the idea that we should not go into this or that extreme, we should keep our mind balanced, appeared here. We should not involve in those situations which overwhelm ourselves, which are more than we can bear right now. This idea is called here, but it's like the descriptive definition of what is yoga. The other thing is there is no inaction. Any kind of our choice would be a kind of action. And the definition, the other definition of yoga here is that yoga is the art of all, in all actions, which is also the idea of yoga as a deeply social process. Yoga is something which offers us to master ourselves in actions. And this idea is actually deeper than it can be imagined at the first glance. For a usual person, being not the top professional one, there is this feeling that you do your work and you do it more or less fine, but there is always some demand from the profession, there is always some demand from your clients, and you always feel yourself like imperfect. Well, in case you are spiritually way and you study from life, this is the right way to feel yourself. And in this case, you like feel that yoga is something which makes you more masterful in the life which you are leading. And the very art in actions is something worth fighting for. And moreover, not only in terms of financial revenues, but also in the feeling that there is some spiritual perspective in any kind of even social and professional activity. Any kind of this activity is larger than man, and to master any kind of profession, one has to change oneself and to improve oneself in this or that way. This idea of self-improvement in any kind of actions as a part of yoga appears here. Another thing is that Bhagavad Gita offers that there is no multitasking, the idea of totality. The shloka 241 states that those who are resolute in this path have one point in mind in the path of yoga, and many branched and endless are thoughts of the irresolute. So the idea of totality as concentration on one single point, one single topic, one single line of action. Of course, here we have the style of yoga closer to like Kshatriya style, the warriors, the political style, the ruler style of yoga. But nevertheless, we have this kind of idea, which actually is also not that obvious even today, that multitasking has nothing to do with productivity. Then Gita offers the idea that yogi should be rebel-minded. And namely, there is this shloka, when your mind, no longer confused by the scriptures, remains steady and stays grounded in Samadhi, then you shall attain yoga. This idea of grounding yourself in Samadhi, and what is Samadhi? We can dig into the morphology of the word and its etymology slightly, because there are lots of misconceptions concerning this term. And here we have the prefix sam, which is like getting together the prefix a, which is a strengthening prefix, the root dha, which is holding, and the ending e, which makes the abstract noun. And thus we have like a holding together. And in this sense, holding together is applied to cognitive aspect, so that our thought is held together. This way, we can attain yoga, being no longer confused by the scriptures. And this is a very unusual idea, especially for that times, and because the scriptures were Vedas actually at that times, the unprecedented, authoritatively scriptures. And for this thing, we see that the idea that yogi should not accept, in intellectual sense, any authorities and be grounded on one's own understandings, one's own life view, is here in the shloka 253 of Bhagavad Gita. Some other ideas are like social responsibility of yogi. We have this concept that the wise should not unsettle the mind of the ignorant ones who are attached to the fruits of work, but the enlightened ones should inspire others by performing all works efficiently without selfish attachment. This shloka offers us the idea that as the enlightened one, those who practice yoga do, so others will do. And the idea that we shouldn't bother or unsettle minds of the others with that which is not suitable for them. The social responsibility idea is also here. Again, it's idea of yoga. The other thing here we see is the concept of a personal way of life, the concept of dharma. In Gita 3:35 here we have this idea that it is far better to perform one's own dharma, though tinged with faults, that no perform another dharma, though perfectly. So if we do something not ours, that's in vain. Following your own nature, not any social schemes. This idea here is also present. The very idea of one's own nature is here. Other lines of ideas we see in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the great text of yoga, and it has lots of misconceptions, lots of delusions. For instance, that the idea that of Ashtanga Yoga, where yoga is assumed, these angas of yoga assumed as stages of yoga, but not its parts. And we have stages like parts, which are bodily practice, which are cognitive practices, which are cleansing procedures, and misunderstanding is that should be practiced one after the other. In practice, that's are the parts of the whole body of yoga, and they coexist. Samadhi is not the ultimate goal of yoga. Well, because most of articles, when we Google Samadhi, we see that Samadhi is a goal of yoga. No, it's not. This idea of gathering together of our understanding is like a part of yoga. It's like one result which we can make when we do yoga. And of course, it's not a kind of trance or non-thinking, and this widespread idea is also spoiling the ideas of authentic yoga. Because Samadhi is the part of the process samyama, which I'll describe later. And there is two parts of Ashtanga Yoga, 8 parts yoga of Yoga Sutras, the yama and niyama. These are not ethics. These are ways to control different kinds of energies. Well, Yoga Sutras do not legitimize postural yoga, actually, as there is a false conception, because only 5 of 186 shlokas deal with asanas, just in a kind of mentioning. Well, cool ideas of Yoga Sutras, which are also actual for today's yoga. These are that first, karma is not a bunch of demons, but a psychological nature. This idea that karma is something outer but not the inner one was preceding Yoga Sutras. About 2,000 years from now were they written. But Patanjali, the author of Yoga Sutras, offers that samskaras, the inner desires, are those which produce karma. And that's actually quite a deep idea. So it's not something outer, but something which we can deal with our inner yoga practices. When there is no naive positive therapy, this idea of working with emotions through consciousness also is here in Patanjali Yoga. The goal of yoga is positive loveliness, so-called kaivalya. Again, it's very close to Stoicism, and approximately same period of emergence of these ideas. And again, one more, there is no sudden bliss. The correct way of cognition is stage-by-stage awareness in samyama process. So we have the ideas of dharana, where we hold our attention on the topic which we are examining. We have the practice of dhyana, the ideas of deeper and methods of deeper thinking within the process. And after this, we have the samadhi, the moment when we got deeper into our thinking process, and we have our line of thought gathered together. This whole thing is samyama. Well, and there is Tantric Yoga, which is not only sex. These ideas I'll slightly describe using a couple of aphorisms of Shiva Sutras, the medieval texts. The idea that reasonableness is divine. And this is originally said as Chaitanya Matma, that from root chit to think, and Atma is well, it's like a hard describable word. It's like a divinity, actually, and it's ourselves in the same time. And the idea that reasonableness is divine, well, actually, it's a powerful idea, and it's natural for the intellectual tradition. Jnanam bandha, knowledge are the chains. Well, we have this idea, similar one in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, where we have one of the vrittis, one of the places where our mind can be confused, the pramana vritti, the fixed conception. And here the knowledge as something which we destroy when we have our new knowledge of today, which destroys the knowledge of yesterday. And tomorrow we will have a new understanding which will destroy the knowledge of today. In this sense, knowledge are the chains. And yoga stages are amazing. Here we have the idea that we should have the amazement if we reach to new stages. And the amazement is also a cognitive act, where we see something which we didn't notice previously. Knowledge is the food, jnanamannam. Again, the intellectual idea where we feed our mental body with conceptually new knowledge. Not the news feeds from Facebook, but truly difficult and conceptually new worldviews. Body is the sacrifice, shariram yajnah. This aphorism of Shiva Sutra resembles us the idea of living our life as fully as possible, because actually the only and the main sacrifice which we are making is our time of life. And what we receive on this personal altar are the new understandings. What we give is our body, our health, and our life. Guru Rupayoho. Guru is the method. This aphorism actually is quite a rebel one concerning its time when it was formulated. And the idea is that the teacher, no matter how authoritative one would be, is more or less the method of understanding something new. And Atman is the actor, Atman Nartaka. And here we might resemble Shakespeare, but here it's like vice versa Shakespeare, when we are the spectators and the whole world is an actor, is something, some stage within which we look at what happens, and we are the we have the aesthetic experience of the world as the basis of cognition. Then the authentic bodily yoga, we should also consider the medieval tantric emergence of bodily practice, namely in the North Indian domain, where existed tantric practitioners called nathas. These practitioners offered different ideas, but those which are actual is the following. The inverted postures were used for life elixir accumulation. There was a reframed idea of life energy, the life elixir, so-called bindu, and different bodily practices to deal with these energies. And bandhas, yogic locks, were used for non-burning of this elixir. Asanas and pranayamas were used for redistribution of energies, control of vayu, not for health and fitness. Well, for health as well, but psychosomatic ideas. The Goraksha Padhati shloka, that regulation of breathing is the fire which burns the seeds of deeds. The word deeds is karma. Thus, Naths brought the idea that correct energetic bodily practice can give us actually something beneficial in psychological terms. And, well, the idea of chakra systems and some real-life results of working with it were described in some later texts. The different kinds of dharanas on this or that chakra, different states of mind. And what's for the modern bodily yoga, reincarnation? Well, the part of authentic yoga should be presented at least by Krishnamacharya contributions, the great teacher of beginning of 20th century, and synthesized various styles of yoga and health improving methods. Well, developed dynamic yoga, suggested personalized approach, replenished Indian bodily techniques with British gym exercises as well. This is what is mentioned by Mark Singleton in his Yoga Body, great book. Adapted fundamental yoga texts to Western mentality also was quite needed at that time. His students, apprentices, the most influential ones, the BKS Iyengar, did contribute the analytical approach to asanas. Well, it was massive, and now we have this very detailed approach to asanas, especially in his school. Of course, he extended the range of asanas to hundreds, which allowed to specify the asana for anyone. Very personalized approach. And he introduced props. Here in the background, I have some yoga wheels and rolls, which are very convenient for extending our bodily practice. And well, the limitations and loss of authentic practices we also have here, and it's worth mentioning because modern post-Indian yoga is largely shaped by these people. For instance, the insufficient attention to pranayamas, almost no attention here, and well, Krishnamacharya, as story tells, didn't teach Iyengar these techniques. Weak meditative aspects, weak to no aspects. Actually, meditations are closer to prayers. Separation from yoga tradition. Well, no other signs of authentic yoga ideas and practices, which I briefly described before, we don't see here in Iyengar Yoga. Then there is Sri Pattabhi Jois, another great student of Krishnamacharya, who contributed bodily practice as training. Well, quite a muscle practice. I spent enough time in Mysore yoga shalas, where most practice Pattabhi Jois style, and well, it's truly getting you into shape. And it employs vinyasas, bundles of asanas, but actually that is not much more here. And the limitations is that actually the Ashtanga has nothing to do with the original Yoga Sutras and ideas. There is no meditative aspects. No individual approach in asanas. We have the fixed bundles, and that's it for all. No energy work in asanas. Namely, we have only 5 breathers in asana, and well, it's okay for demonstration purposes, which was actual for his teacher Krishnamacharya when he made exhibitions in Mysore Palace, but otherwise it would not be spectacular. But in this case, it doesn't work for us in energetic, authentic sense. And then there is separation from yoga tradition as in Iyengar's way, because actually no ideas which were mentioned are present in this widespread yoga style. And these couple of styles like Iyengar yoga and Pattabhi Jois yoga, the Ashtanga Vinyasa, actually comprise more than half of everything which we can see today as institutionalized post-Indian yoga, well, around the Western world. There are Indian schools within India, but I will not discuss them deeply, because that's not for our case. And what's for authentic modern yoga? How can we view it, and what is it in my and our vision and practice? How it could be? Well, Hatha yoga, we have asanas, pranayamas, and we perform them in energetic sense. So, in sense of redistribution of energies within body. I know this sounds quite mystical, and this experience is actually not that mystical as it sounds, but well, it's possible. It's not just fairy tales of old times. And there is bandhas, mudras, kriyas. All this also is employed again for both bodily and energetic purposes. Then it's after Krishnamacharya, we build the individual complexes because all the bodies are different, and that's what's for modern yoga. It's something inevitable. Niyama, cleansing techniques, again, most of modern schools lost this part, but why should we? Yoga therapy practices, niyama practices, all of this is well available, and it's quite well studied, especially within the Indian schools, like the Delhi school of, and well, there are several, but I will not discuss them right now. Then the psychopractical aspects like Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Karma Yoga. Well, these brands were like first described in Bhagavad Gita and then promoted between 19th and 20th century by Vivekananda in his books with the same names. But practically, these constitute from intellectual techniques, working with logical constructions, working with argumentations for Jnana Yoga, working with emotions, different ways of, with Bhakti Yoga. And different types of working with social interactions in karma yoga. And self-actualization techniques, meditation techniques, development of chakra system is also a part of authentic practices within our modern yoga, which actually cannot be avoided and is a basis of authentic yoga. Also we have authentic modern yoga branches, additional branches for practices like Bodily Yoga. Well, in ancient times we didn't need this kind of distribution, but in our case different ages require different kinds of practice, and we have the yoga for the mature people, the vritti. We have yoga therapy. Well, it always was, but in terms of Rasayana and Ayurveda practices. But in our case, we have possibility of huge experimental basis. Well, it's a worldwide movement, and we also have this. We have Prasa yoga, yoga for the pregnant, and pregnant is a different kind of practice. Of course, we should have a special kind of bodily practice. And what's for bodily practices, of course, we can have different styles which are required by today's demands, like sculpturing the body in Kaya yoga and making body more stiff, strong, and in the same way, in the same time, fluent in Sandhana yoga. So all this can comprise more or less a whole picture of how can modern yoga with authentic roots look like. And actually that's what we are doing in our school. So for whom authentic yoga is the best self-transformation method and why? Well, first for the open-minded ones, in order to accept one's own imperfection, because otherwise self-transformation is impossible. Well, we have to be mature enough to do psycho-practices. Actually, without enough life experience, it's impossible to do all this which was mentioned before. In some way romantic, in the way in which these ideas and these aesthetics, these metaphors, and this worldview can fascinate us and make us want to become the part of this world of yoga. Well, we should have healthy body for the purpose of pretty complex asanas. They are not the goal, but they are proper means for some transformations. And one should be healthy mentally, because the experiments with consciousness, which is the basis of authentic yoga, could only harm those who don't have this mental strength and stability. So what's for the rest? I think only the personal desire, the intuition might tell one if this kind of yoga is for him or for her. That's probably all which I can suggest as ideas for this kind of lecture. And thank you for your attention.